He didn't leave me the house. He didn't leave me the savings account we built together over 31 years, the one I made deposits into every single month while he handled the big picture. He didn't even leave me the car, the silver Buick I'd driven to every one of his chemotherapy appointments. He left it all to a man named Curtis Webb, and my son-in-law had been helping him do it for years. I found out on a Thursday in November, the kind of cold that gets into your bones before you even step outside. I wasn't looking for anything. I was cleaning out the closet in my late husband's home office, the one he'd always called off limits, and I'd always respected that. 31 years of respecting that closed door. I found the folder behind a shoebox of old receipts. It was plain manila, nothing written on the outside. I thought it was tax documents. I almost put it back. The will was notarized. The date at the bottom was 4 years before he passed. 4 years he'd been walking around knowing. 4 years of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings, and him squeezing my hand in the hospital when the diagnosis came back worse than expected. 4 years of lies so practiced they looked like love. Curtis Webb. I'd never heard that name once in 31 years of marriage. Not a relative, not a former colleague, not a neighbor from the old neighborhood. A stranger's name on a document that erased me from my own life. Everything, the house, the retirement account, the savings, the truck, his father's pocket watch, all of it, gone to a man I could not place. And then I turned to the witness page. 2 signatures. The first I didn't recognize. The second I knew the way I knew my own face. My daughter's husband, Alan. He'd signed his name in that same neat, careful print he used on birthday cards. He'd been sitting at my kitchen table just 3 weeks before my husband died, eating the pot roast I'd made from scratch, telling me I looked tired and should let him and my daughter handle more of the arrangements. Handle more. I almost laughed when I thought of that now. He'd been handling things for years. I sat on the floor of that office for a long time. Not crying, just sitting, the folder in my lap, the house so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum from 2 rooms away. I kept looking at his signature like it might rearrange itself into something that made sense. It didn't. My daughter called that night around 7. I let it ring. She called again at 7:40. I picked up the second time. "Mom, are you okay? You didn't answer earlier." I told her I'd found something in your father's office. Just that. Nothing more. There was a pause. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. But 2 seconds is an eternity when you're listening for guilt. "What kind of something?" she asked. I said I'd found a folder. Legal documents. She went quiet again. When she spoke, her voice had dropped half a register. "Mom, can we talk in person?" She already knew what was in that folder. I understood that in the space of one exhale. I told her Tuesday. Come Tuesday. Then I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I made tea. I didn't drink. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder open in front of me, reading the will 3 more times like the words might change. They didn't. I was listed nowhere. Not as a beneficiary, not even acknowledged as the surviving spouse. Just erased. Clean, quiet, legal. In the morning, I put on my coat and drove to see my attorney. I'd used him twice before, once for a property dispute, once when my mother passed. He was a careful man, methodical, and he did not sugarcoat things. He read through the will twice without speaking. Then he set it down and folded his hands on the desk. "This is valid," he said. "Executed correctly, properly witnessed, filed 4 years ago. Contesting it would be an uphill battle." I asked what my options were. "You're protected by state law as a surviving spouse," he said. "In Georgia, a spouse cannot be entirely disinherited. You're entitled to what's called an elective share, roughly 1/3 of the estate." 1/3 of what I built over 3 decades. 1/3. "And the house?" I asked. He paused. "You'd need to file a claim. It's not automatic, but you have legal standing." I left his office with a list of next steps and a feeling in my chest like something had calcified there overnight. That afternoon, I drove past Curtis Webb's address. I'd found it in the folder. typed on a single page that listed the assets and the recipient. A house out in Marietta, modest, well-kept, with a rusted mailbox and a wind chime on the porch that moved in the November air. A man came out to get his mail while I was parked across the street. 60s, gray at the temples, moved slowly like someone whose knees gave him trouble. He didn't notice me. I sat there for 10 minutes, then I drove home. My daughter came on Tuesday. She let herself in with her key, which I noticed she still used without knocking. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. She didn't bring her husband. "Where's Alan?" I asked. She looked at her hands. "He thought it was better if I came alone." "I'll bet he did." "How long have you known?" I said. She looked up. For a moment I thought she might try to deny it. Then she didn't. "Dad told us 4 years ago, before he changed it." "Us," I repeated. "Me and Alan. Not your brother." She shook her head. "My son lived in Phoenix. He and his father had been distant the last decade, some old argument that never fully healed. My husband hadn't told him, either because he didn't trust him to keep quiet or because he knew that, unlike his sister, my son would have told me." "Why?" I asked. "Just that one word. I had 100 questions behind it, but I wanted to see which one she'd answer for." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dad said you'd be taken care of, that you had your pension, your Social Security, that the house was worth enough that your share under the law would be more than enough to start over." Start over? I was 67 years old. "He said Curtis needed it more," she continued, "that he'd made a promise to someone a long time ago and he needed to keep it." "Who is Curtis Webb?" She looked out the window. The lilac bush I'd planted the year she got married was bare now, just sticks against the gray November sky. "He's Dad's son?" she said quietly. "From before you were married." The room went sideways for a moment. I gripped the edge of the table. A son. He had a son. A whole person, a whole life, hidden somewhere in the years before I knew him. And he'd carried that secret for 31 years, buried it under Sunday dinners and anniversary cards and hospital squeezes and "I love yous" said in the dark. He'd kept it so long it had its own heartbeat. "You knew?" I said again. "You knew this man existed and you sat at my table. You had dinner here, you hugged me at his funeral." Her eyes filled. "I didn't know what to do." "You could have told me." "He made us promise." "He's dead now," I said. "And I still found out alone." She didn't have an answer for that. Good. There wasn't one. After she left, I sat very still. The tea went cold. The clock above the stove ticked the way it always had, indifferent. I thought about the 31 years I'd spent becoming a wife so thorough, so complete, that I'd forgotten to stay a person alongside it. I cooked his preferred meals. I hosted his colleagues. I gave up a job I loved in 1998 because the commute conflicted with his schedule, and I'd told myself it was a mutual decision, because that was easier than calling it what it was. I called my son that night. He picked up on the second ring. I told him everything. He was quiet through most of it, the kind of quiet that means he was listening, not the kind that means he already knew. When I finished, he said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm coming." "You don't have to." "I'm coming," he said again. He arrived Friday. He took the couch without being asked, brought groceries, fixed the loose handle on the back door that had been rattling for 6 months. He didn't ask me to talk about it more than I wanted to, but on the second night, after dinner, he sat across from me and said, "What do you want to do?" I told him I wanted to fight. I hired a new attorney that week. Her name was Miss Okafor, mid-50s, sharp, with reading glasses she never actually put on her face, but carried everywhere. She specialized in estate disputes and had a framed print on her wall that read in small letters, "What's right and what's legal aren't always the same thing, but they're closer than people think." I liked her immediately. She reviewed everything carefully: the will, the Georgia elective share statute, my husband's financial records, the deed to the house. The good news, she said, is that Georgia law protects you. You have the right to claim your elective share within 7 months of probate opening. That clock is still running. And the house? She set down the papers and looked at me directly. That's more complicated. The house is in his name alone. He put it there before you married. You've lived in it for 3 decades, contributed to every mortgage payment, every renovation, but legally, your name was never on the deed. I stared at her. How is that possible? It's more common than people think, she said, not unkindly, especially in marriages where one partner handled all the paperwork. She paused. Did you ever ask to be added to the deed? I hadn't. I hadn't even known to ask. That sat in the room between us like an indictment of something I couldn't name. The system, maybe. Or the version of myself that had trusted so completely she'd stopped reading the fine print on her own life. What can I do? I asked. Ms. Okafor leaned forward. We file the elective share claim immediately. That gives you 1/3 of the total estate value. We also challenge the transfer of the house on grounds that it was part of a pattern of concealment. It's not guaranteed, but there's a real argument to be made. She tapped her pen on the desk. And there's one more thing. The will names Curtis Webb as sole beneficiary, but it doesn't account for what happens if he predeceases you or formally declines the inheritance. Can he decline it? He can. People do, sometimes for tax reasons, sometimes for personal ones. She paused. If he declines, we petition for intestate succession on the unclaimed portion. Combined with the elective share, you'd recover most of what you're owed. I left her office with something I hadn't had in days, a plan. I went to see Curtis Webb on a Wednesday morning. I didn't tell my daughter. I drove out to Marietta alone, parked in front of that rust-edged mailbox, and rang the bell. He answered the door in a flannel shirt and reading glasses, holding a coffee mug. He went very still when he saw me. You must be Lorraine, he said. I nodded. May I come in? He stepped back without a word and let me enter. The house was quiet and orderly, books on every surface, a dog somewhere in the back that huffed but didn't bark. He poured me a cup of coffee without asking, which I found oddly respectful. We sat at his kitchen table. Outside his window, an oak tree had dropped most of its leaves. I didn't ask for this, he said. He meant the will. I know, I said. I didn't, not for certain, but I was listening. He contacted me 3 years before he passed, Curtis said. I hadn't spoken to him in 20 years before that. My mother raised me alone. He was never in the picture. He turned the mug in his hands. I didn't want his money. I told him that. But he said it was about making things right. Making things right with you, I said, by taking everything from me. He looked down. I didn't know the full picture until after the fact. I knew there was a wife. He didn't tell me there was nothing left for you. We sat in silence for a moment. The coffee was strong and bitter, and I drank it anyway. I'm not here to threaten you, I said. I'm here to ask you to decline the inheritance. Walk away from the house, the savings, all of it. Let the law give me what I'm owed. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I watched the oak tree outside lose 2 more leaves to the wind. He wasn't a good father, he said finally. Wasn't even a present one, and it sounds like he wasn't a good husband either. He looked at me. I'll decline, he said. I'll call the attorney this week. I thanked him. I stood to leave, and at the door I paused. I'm sorry, I said, that he didn't tell you the truth either. He nodded once. That was enough. My son was waiting at the house when I got back. I told him what happened. He exhaled slow and long like he'd been holding his breath for days. Then he pulled me into a hug that lasted a little longer than usual. You're going to be okay, he said. I know, I said, and this time I meant it. The next weeks moved with a kind of slow purpose. Miss Okafor filed the elective share claim. Curtis's attorney sent the formal refusal of inheritance. The estate went into a holding pattern, paperwork stacking like snow. My daughter called 3 times. I spoke to her briefly each time, politely, the way you speak to someone when you're not ready and may never be. Her husband, Alan, did not call. I started making lists, accounts in my name, accounts in his, insurance policies, the pension I'd earned from 22 years at the school district, my social security, the modest IRA I'd kept separately without fully understanding why, some instinct in me that had quietly, stubbornly insisted on one corner of my own. I was grateful for that instinct now. I called my bank and separated what I could. Clean lines, like Miss O'Coffer said. No overlap. I sorted through his desk. I wasn't looking for more surprises, but I was no longer afraid of finding them either. What I found instead was a letter, handwritten, dated, the December before he died. It was addressed to me but never sent. Lorraine, there are things I should have told you. I kept them because I thought I was protecting you. I understand now that I was protecting myself. I'm sorry. I don't know if he'll ever forgive me, but I wanted to say it while I still could. He hadn't said it, not while he could, not in 31 years of chances. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer with his old receipts. Not to cherish it, just to have it. My granddaughter called on a Sunday. She was 24, lived in Atlanta, had her mother's brown eyes and her father's unfortunate habit of talking over people, but was working on it. She said her mother had told her a version of events that made me sound erratic. She said she'd decided to hear my version. She came the following weekend. She was quiet while I talked. When I finished, she didn't say anything dramatic. She just reached across the table and squeezed my hand once. I'm not picking sides, she said, but I'm not pretending this is okay. That's all I ask, I said. She started coming by more often after that. She helped me go through the house, identify what was mine and what I'd want to keep, what could be sold, what should be given away. She had an eye for what mattered and what was just accumulation. On a Tuesday afternoon, she found an old photograph in the bottom of a junk drawer. Two people on a beach I didn't recognize. Somewhere sunny and distant, my husband, much younger, standing next to a woman I assumed was Curtis's mother. I looked at the photograph for a moment. Then I set it aside. I'm not angry, I told her. I think I was for a while. Now I'm just tired of the version of my life that had to be built around him. She looked at me. What does the version without that look like? I had to think about it. Smaller, I said, in a good way, just mine. The day Miss Okafor called to say the elective share had been approved and the house would be released to me as part of the settlement, I was standing in the kitchen making soup. Real soup, the kind you simmer for 3 hours with the bones, the way my own mother had taught me. It's done, I said. It's done, she said. The house is yours, the funds are being transferred, you're protected. I thanked her. I hung up. I stood at the stove and stirred the soup. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt accurate, like something that had been described wrong for a long time had finally been corrected. My daughter came to see me the following Thursday. She came alone again. No Alan. She sat at the table and she was different this time. Quieter, deflated, like something had let the air out of her. I should have told you, she said, when Dad first told us. I should have said something. I let that sit. You were afraid of him, I said. She looked surprised. He had a way of making the wrong choice feel necessary, I said. I know because I lived with it for 30 years. You were his daughter. He could do it to you in half the time. Her eyes filled. That doesn't make it okay. No, I said. It doesn't, but it makes it human. We didn't fix anything that afternoon. You don't fix 30 years in an afternoon. But we talked. For the first time in weeks, maybe longer, we talked without anyone performing for the other. When she left, she hugged me. I let her. Alan called the next day. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that was a careful, rehearsed thing, full of phrases like moving forward and what's best for the family. I listened to it once and deleted it. If he ever wanted to have a real conversation, the kind where you say the hard thing plainly and don't retreat behind language that was designed to absorb blame without accepting it, I'd be here. but I wasn't going to rehearse it for him. I put the house on the market in January. The realtor, a crisp woman who wore heels even in cold weather, walked through with her clipboard and her competent eyes and said, "This is a beautiful home. You'll get strong offers." "Good," I said. "I'd like to be done with it by spring." 3 offers in 2 weeks. I took the second, a young family with a toddler and another on the way. The wife cried a little when she saw the kitchen. I told her I hoped they'd be happy there. I meant it more than I thought I would. I moved into an apartment near Midtown, 2 bedrooms, one for me and one that I'd decided would be for guests, for my granddaughter when she visited, for my son when he came from Phoenix. The building had a small courtyard where I could sit in the mornings with my coffee when the weather was good. The neighbors kept to themselves, which suited me. I brought almost nothing from the old house: the soup pot, a lamp my mother had left me, the quilt I'd made in 1994. The winter I got very sick and was home for 3 months and had to do something with my hands. A box of photographs that were mine, of me before him, of me with my children when they were small, of my sister and I at the shore before she moved to Florida. I left the formal dining set. I left the coordinated bedroom furniture. I left the decorative pieces we'd chosen together at markets and antique fairs, the ones I'd always considered ours, but that had never really felt like me. My granddaughter helped me carry boxes on a Saturday. She stood in the empty living room of the new apartment with her hands on her hips and looked around. "It needs something on that wall," she said. "Not yet," I said. "Let it be empty for a while." She looked at me. "You're not sad about leaving?" I thought about it honestly. "I'm sad about what I thought the house meant," I said. "I'm not sad about leaving." She nodded like she understood, even though she was too young to fully understand. And someday, when she was older, she would come back to this moment in her memory and understand it completely. The legal piece resolved itself fully in February. Miss Okafor filed the final paperwork, the elective share was dispersed, the assets clarified. When I sat across from her for the last time and she handed me the summary of what had been recovered, I looked at the number and said, "It's less than half of what we built." "It is," she said. "The law protected you as much as it could. That's the best I can tell you." "I know," I said. "It's enough." I meant it. On a Wednesday in March, I went to a community center near my apartment that had a notice taped in the window about a memoir writing class. 6 weeks, Tuesday evenings. The flyer looked like it had been printed in 1987 and photocopied until the edges blurred. I took a tab with the phone number and called that afternoon. The class was 8 women and 1 man, ranging from 61 to 83. We met around a long folding table with terrible overhead lighting and surprisingly good decaf. The teacher, a retired librarian who said her name was Pearl, believed in reading aloud. "The voice is the truth teller," she said on the first night. "You'll hear yourself say something and know it's real or know it isn't." On the 3rd week, she asked us to write about a moment we'd been silent when we should have spoken. I wrote about the day my husband showed me the house the first time, the deed with only his name on it, and how he'd said it was just a formality, and how I'd nodded because I didn't want to make it strange, and how I had handed that power over to him with a single nod and never taken it back. I read it aloud. My voice stayed steady. When I finished, the woman across from me, a tall woman named Betty who had the bearing of someone who had survived considerable things, said quietly, "That's the one. That's the sentence the whole piece is built around." Pearl said, "Read that last line again." I did. I handed that power over with a single nod and spent 30 years pretending the nod hadn't happened. The room was quiet in the way rooms get when something true has been said in them. My son called on a Sunday in April, the way he always did, on Sunday mornings while he drank his coffee and I drank mine, 2 time zones apart. "How are you?" he asked. "Good," I said, and then because it was true, really good. "I'm glad," he said. He sounded like he meant it. "I signed up for a painting class," I said. "Watercolor, starts next month." He laughed. "Since when do you paint?" since now," I said. My daughter and I still spoke on the phone. Not every week, but regularly. We were finding our way back to each other along a path that was narrower than it used to be, but more honest. I didn't bring up Alan. She didn't bring up the will. We talked about our kids and my granddaughter's internship and a television series we'd both started watching independently and ended up further ahead than the other. It wasn't what we were, but it was something, and some days something is the better thing anyway. One morning in May, I sat in the courtyard with my coffee while the city woke up around me. A woman walked by with a small dog that tried to make friends with a potted fern. A man on a bicycle rang his bell once for no visible reason. Two pigeons disagreed about something on the far edge of the wall. I had nowhere I needed to be for another 2 hours. I thought about the 31 years. I didn't regret all of them. There were years that were genuinely good, genuinely ours. Summers on the lake, the year my son was born, and we were both so terrified and so in love with the small, loud person we'd made that we forgot to argue for almost 6 months. The way my husband had held my hand in the waiting room after my biopsy, not saying anything, just holding on. Those were real. They coexisted with everything else that was also real. I didn't have to choose which version was the truth. But I also didn't owe him the rest of my life. I opened the notebook my granddaughter had given me for my birthday. She'd written inside the front cover, "For the stories you haven't told yet." I'd been writing in it almost every day since March. I wrote one line. I am 68 years old, and I just learned that starting over and starting fresh are not the same thing. Starting over implies you lost something. Starting fresh means you get to decide what to carry. I closed the notebook, drank my coffee, watched the pigeons resolve whatever the disagreement was. Somewhere in the building above me, someone was cooking something that smelled like garlic and butter and a good morning. The day was mine, all of it, and I was just beginning to understand how much that was worth. I used to think the hardest thing about growing old was losing people. I know now it's discovering who they really were after they're gone, when there's no chance to ask, no chance to hear them explain themselves, no chance for anything except sitting with the truth and figuring out what to do with it. When I found that will, I had a choice. I could have folded. A lot of women do, and I don't judge them for it, because the pressure to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to let the family hold its shape even when the shape is wrong, that pressure is real, and it's heavy, and it has a way of feeling like love when it isn't. But I had spent 31 years nodding when I should have asked questions. I had signed away mornings and careers and corners of myself because I trusted that the person beside me was building something for both of us, and he wasn't. That was the truth. And the truth, once you see it clearly, becomes the only foundation you can build anything honest on. What I learned from all of it, from Curtis and Alan and the attorney's office and the long nights at the kitchen table, is that consequences don't wait for the right moment. My husband made choices in secret and called it protection. My daughter stayed silent and called it loyalty. My son-in-law signed his name on a document that erased me and called it staying out of it. None of them named what it really was, which was a long chain of small decisions that added up to one very large harm. That's how it usually works. Not one dramatic betrayal, but 100 quiet ones, each one looking reasonable in isolation, each one making the next one easier. What pulled me through wasn't rage. Rage burns fast and leaves you empty. What carried me was something slower and more stubborn, the part of me that looked at Ms. Okafor across that desk and said, "I want to know my options." The part that drove to Marietta and rang a stranger's doorbell without knowing what I'd find. The part that showed up to a memoir class with bad lighting and worse coffee and read something true out loud to a room full of strangers. That stubbornness, the refusal to accept that the story was already written and I had no more lines, that was what mattered. And somewhere in all of it, I also had to find it in myself to extend something to the people who hurt me. Not forgiveness in the easy sense, not the kind that pretends nothing happened, but the kind that acknowledges that people do wrong things for complicated reasons, and that understanding those reasons doesn't mean you owe them your silence, or your inheritance, or your remaining years. My daughter was afraid of her father. My son-in-law was loyal to the wrong person. Curtis never asked for any of it, understanding that freed me from carrying their mistakes as my own. I'm 68 years old. I have a notebook with pages still empty in it. I have a granddaughter who came back and told the truth when it was easier not to. I have a son who showed up on a Friday with groceries and fixed the back door. I have an apartment with good morning light and no one to answer to but myself. I didn't win anything back. I reclaimed it. There's a difference. Winning implies a fight. What I did was simply refuse to disappear quietly, and it turned out that was enough.